You know, that is probably the toughest question I could ever think of to answer, because I don't know. What I would do was just sit back and try to think of something. I don't know that there's any inspiration involved. When I worked at Marvel, I worked for a publisher. And for example, when the Fantastic Four sold well, he said, oh, maybe the fans like groups of heroes. Come up with another group. So I sat and I thought, and I came up with the X-Men. But how I did it, I don't know. I mean, I just tried to think of a group. And I probably thought of a number of them where I said, nah, that's no good. Nah, that's no good. In fact, with the X-Men, I remember one of the toughest things is coming up with the superpower. How do they get their superpower? And I had already had the Fantastic Four get their power from cosmic rays, and I think Daredevil got his from gamma rays, and Spider-Man got his from a radioactive spider, and I was running out of ideas. So I said, hey, I'll make them mutants. They're born that way, and then I don't need any new rays. But it's just a matter of thinking. I mean, you sit and you think until the right idea hits you. There's no trick to it. Every writer in the world has to be aware of what's happening around him. And you usually try to inject a little bit of what's going on in your stories, but I never tried to write stories that were specifically about what's happening. Maybe the closest one was Iron Man, where I tried to get a hero who was part of the establishment, who made munitions, and he did all the things that young people in our country at the time didn't like people to do. He was a weapons maker and so forth. He was a billionaire, and he probably cheated on his taxes. And I thought it would be fun to get a guy like that. But aside from that, I would just try to think of a character or characters that had interesting powers and that did interesting things in a way that our other characters didn't do them, so there was a lot of variety. Luckily, I have read so many books when I was young. I have such a resource. I read Jules Verne and Alexander Dumas and Victor Hugo and Charles Dickens, Conan Doyle, of course. And I mean, all of these people were genius. I mean, Sherlock Holmes was so wonderful. You know, to me, he was a real superhero. He could think anything through. The Scarlet Pimpernel. Now, that was about a guy who saved noblemen in France from being guillotined in the Revolution, French Revolution, where he would sneak over to France and assume a disguise and find clever ways to save them. And that was one of the first stories where I felt the hero was really kind of a superhero with what he was doing. Basically, I judge by what I like. I don't think I'm that different from most people. So if there's a subject that I think I would like to read about, or see on the screen, or watch on television, I figure there must be other people who'd like it too. And so I've usually just tried to please myself. You know, a lot of writers say, well, I write for people from 20 to 30 or from 18 to 27. I don't know how to do that. I can only write for myself, and I can hope if I really like this, hopefully there are other people who have the same taste I do. I felt I would love to read about a Norse god named Thor, who had a wicked brother named Loki, and the two of them are always fighting and using their magic and their powers, and it takes place up in Asgard. Of course, when I wrote it, Thor also had a human identity down here on Earth. He was a lame doctor who walked with a cane, and when he hit the cane on the ground, it turned into the hammer of Thor, and he became Thor. And when he hit it again, he became the Doctor again, and nobody knew the Doctor was Thor. But that's the way it started. But to me, that was fun. I enjoyed writing it. Maybe the most surprising was one day I said, gee, I'll bet I could make a hero out of a guy who is blind. Because if you're blind, all your other senses become magnified to a degree. If I just exaggerate that. And then I came up with Daredevil. So maybe that was the most surprising one, because you wouldn't think of a blind superhero right off the bat. I try to think of the characters first. And I try to think, what would make this character interesting? Let's say the character's a detective. All right, there are millions of detectives in movies and television and novels. What can I do to make my detective unique and stand out from all the others? And what can I do to make all the other characters interesting to read about? The kind of people you'd like to know because they're colorful. And so I'd write that down. I'd write the name of the character and what there is about him or her that I would find interesting. Then I now need a story. So I try to think of where can it take place that would be a colorful setting. Okay, who's the bad guy? And why does the good guy have to fight the bad guy? And why is the bad guy trying to hurt the good guy? And you just keep thinking about it, and I keep writing notes, and after a while I've got a synopsis of maybe 2 or 3 pages. You can only do your best if you're doing what you like to do. If you're trying to write to please other people, you don't know other people. You think you do, but you don't. But you know yourself. And if you write something that pleases yourself, then it can be genuine. If you can please yourself with what you do, there have to be other people who have the same taste. Now, by the same token, it depends what kind of writer you are. If you're a writer who wants to write for a television series, you damn well have to write that series the way the showrunner wants it written. If you're doing a movie for a movie company and they're looking for a special type of story, you got to give them that type of story. But if you're just trying to come up with ideas that you will try to sell as you go along, I would try to find what idea interests you the most. What would make you want to read this? Write something that you feel, boy, if there were a story like that, I would love it. And go ahead and write it, and the chances are, as I say, there'll be a lot of people who have the same taste as you do. It's hard to write for someone else. It's easy to write for yourself, but you have to write well.